Hey everyone, it's Abby. Today let's continue to the next step of my ever after Italian Renaissance dress. So there aren't any existing extant support garments left from 1490s Italian Renaissance. Costumers speculate that they used either a pair of bodies or that they added support structure to the bodice of their underdress. A lot of costumers choose to use support garments from similar style dresses, such as the Regency era. Because I had cut out a pair of short stays when I cut out my long stays, I decided it was time to finish those up so I could use them for this outfit. I may make a different support garment decision in the future, but this felt like a good excuse to finish my stays, so I'll take it. I will definitely use these stays for my Regency outfits as well. When I decided to make a pair of short stays, I had saved a pair of embroidered ones on Pinterest that inspired me, so I really wanted to add embroidery to this pair. I like the idea of having pretty undergarments even though no one will see them, so let's get started. I had already cut out the pieces of my short stays when I cut out my long stays. I'm using Laughing Moon 115. The Laughing Moon pattern has short and long stays, theatrical and corded versions, front or back closing, and even has a pattern for a chemise, which I've made previously. A really versatile pattern for Regency undergarments. I had already done the math needed for my size and the size of the gussets, so thankfully I didn't need to do that again. The pattern has very detailed description of how to figure out your size. I have already made these long stays in my chosen size, so I don't need to make the mock-up of these short stays, so that also saves time. I am using cotton twill that I found at Joann's for the fabric, 2 layers. The pattern says that you can use cotton twill for this along with a few other choices. This was the easiest fabric for me to find, so that's what I ended up using. I cut the pattern pieces slightly larger where the pattern indicates to compensate for the cording. I'll cut those bits off before doing the final sew-up. I'm using pencil to transfer all the markings, starting with the front busk area and gusset placement. This would be much easier if I had a light table of some kind. I can almost kind of see it through the fabric, but I have to keep checking. I'm also marking the cording lines. This is on the right side of the inside piece. The markings will show on the inside of the stays, so I have sewing lines to follow. I'm just using the cording pattern that comes with the pattern. I could come up with my own if I wanted, but I find it easier to use theirs. I have to transfer the markings to all the inner pieces, so it's pretty time intensive. I marked the back lacing and grommet area as well. I'm doing back spiral lace stays. I took the instructions on how to attach the gussets. It's not super difficult, but I just don't want to make mistakes as you have to have a kind of small seam allowance. I machine sew the seam allowance for the gussets as the first step. Next, I cut along the pencil markings. I could use an iron for this part, but I chose to finger press the seam allowances. I fold under at the machine stitch and pin the gusset in along both sides. Once I have them all pinned in, it's time to hand stitch. I used doubled poly thread and a small whip stitch to sew each gusset in. The instructions say to leave the bottom free when you get to it for a later step, but I just whip around the entire thing. It won't make much of a difference. I'll be reinforcing the points when I start my embroidery. I use a pink thread and outline the busk and boning channels on the front piece. I need to know where to place my embroidery. I create an embroidery pattern on the back freehand with pencil. I'm starting with the busk and boning channels. I'm just adding a little bit of vines and leaves. I actually got the placement wrong for the busk area, but I fix that a little later. I start with doubled shiny green embroidery thread and create an outline of the leaf. I fill in the outline with long waist stitches. The idea is to cover all the white inside. Next, I do a satin stitch to create the final leaf. For the vine parts, I just do a long running back stitch. Nothing special. I probably could have found a more interesting embroidery stitch, but I didn't really feel like I needed it. I continue with the same method. My pattern is on the back in pencil, so I continue to check where I place my stitches as I go along. But as it's on the back, if I'm a little off, it won't show. I continue the busk embroidery vine work. I also finished up the small boning channel embroidery. I removed the pink stitching lines. I hand top stitch along all the gussets. Now that the gussets are sewn in, I pin the front two pieces together to prepare to sew the cording lines, and I also pin up the sides of the back pieces. Those need to be attached before adding the cording lines. I machine sew the back to the side back pieces. I machine sew along all the markings on the front piece to create cording and boning channels. This takes a while. I don't anchor my stitching as it's really not needed. This is why my pencil markings are so helpful. It would be very difficult to sew all the cording channels otherwise. machine sew more cording channels, so many. I just run a continuous stitch where I can. It's quicker than stopping and starting. I drop my needle every time I need to turn a corner. Now that the back pieces are sewn together, I need to add the final cording channels that go across the seam line. Here's where I realized that my Busk embroidery was off-center. I seam ripped the other side of the machine stitching so that I can go back in and balance it out. I added another line of embroidered vines next to the first two. This worked to center the embroidery again. I don't have the wide wooden busk that is called for. I just have a 1/2 inch wide, thick, straight steel bone to place, so I've added a couple cording channels on each side of that. I pin the backs together along the lacing sides to prepare to machine sew. I machine sew those up. I trim the seam allowance along the edge. Then I trim one of the seam allowances in the middle. The instructions say which side to trim, and I get it wrong every time. It's supposed to reduce the bulk and make it easier to push the cording through when you get to that step. Oh well, I tried. It still ends up working. I press all those seam allowances flat. Then I press along the lacing line. I pin the backs together to prepare to sew all the boning and cording channels. I machine sew cording and boning channels on the backs where I've marked, similar to the front. That's a lot of stitching. I reinforced the inside gussets with white hand stitching. I'm using the green embroidery thread for the outside gussets, so it looks prettier. This just reinforces the points so they don't come apart. I'm doing more decorative embroidery. Now that I'm not worried about boning channels, I can sew straight through both layers anywhere I want embroidery. I add green scroll work to the waist area. The gusset reinforcement looks like little green hearts. I love it! I've been adding more vine work along the bust area in sections. As you can see, the bust is fairly free, so I'm just embroidering through one layer. My pencil pattern is on the back of the fabric again. I continuously check my stitches. It's a lot of slow hand embroidery, but I'm really liking the results so far. I begin to add the cording. I found this stuff on Amazon. It's cotton butcher's twine. I have a large blunt tapestry needle that I thread with the butcher's twine. I stick the needle through one cording channel and poke it through on the back. I use my awl to create a small hole, and I'm able to poke the needle through and push it back through. I leave half-inch tails on all the cords, as suggested by the instructions. It's really difficult to push the needle through the channels. They say you can use pliers to help, but I just don't feel like going to find any, so my fingers hate me by the end of this. I have to hold the needle and massage the cording through the channel as I go. It's very labor intensive, and I may have a slightly too big needle, but I'm using what I have on hand, and it mostly works. I just have a single cord going through each channel that I created. It's starting to look really great already. I continue to add vine embroidery to the bust area. The front piece is all corded up, and I've finished adding vines. I'm liking how it's looking. I debated adding more vine work, but I decided against it. A look at the back with all the cording sticking out. I'm starting the vine work on the back pieces. I just kinda chose where I wanted them and freehand drew vines on the back. More green vine hand embroidery on the back. I liked the every other lane look for the top. Beanie says she's helping. Now that the embroidery is done, I can continue on to the next step. I take out my pattern pieces because now I have to cut off the sides to true up the size of the stays. I fold it along the waistline and I mark in pencil where I will be cutting. The cording shrinks the fabric a little, so this is why you have to have a little extra to play with and cut it off when you're ready to sew it up. I cut along all the pencil lines I just traced. Next, I clip off all the cording ends that are sticking out. There we are! The front is ready to go! I now do the same process for the back pieces. I have to use both pattern pieces to line it up correctly before I know where to cut it off. I mark with pencil, then I cut along those lines. And I trim the rest of the cording away. So now I'm comparing with my long stays and marking where I will place the grommets. I want to make sure I'm doing the spiral lacing grommets, so the top two on one side are closer and the bottom two on the other side. I turn my first marks upside down to mark the other side. I want offset grommet holes so I can lace it up spiral-like. Next, I need to attach the shoulder straps. There are two sides. I need to attach one to each side of the shoulder seam. And I pin it in place. The corded back piece is sandwiched between the two shoulder straps. I cut a bit more off the underarm to make it smoother. I'm pinning the back to the front. I pin the front side of the back to the doubled up front, leaving the back lining free. I machine sew those seams up. I clip all those seams to 1/4 inch. I press all those seams in place. I also fold the lining and press the seam allowance, and clip to 1/4 inch. I pin the lining in place. I whip stitch the lining down to the inside. I pin and machine sew along the shoulder straps to keep them in place. I machine sew a boning channel next to the side seam. Here's all my steel boning. I have spiral steel for the 2 side boning channels. I also have 2/4 inch straight steel bones for the back, next to the grommets. 2 short straight steel ones for right next to each bust. These are all 1/4 inch. I have a thicker 1/2 inch straight steel bone for the center busk. I decided I wanted something colorful for the bias tape. I'm using the light pink textured cotton from my Edwardian walking suit I made last year. I'm cutting 1 1/4 inch strips on the bias. I also cut a slightly larger 1 1/2 inch strip for the front. That's where I will have a gathering ribbon, so I need a little more room. I figured out how much length I need for each section and sewed them together at an angle. I pressed all the seams. Oops, sorry about the steam. I pressed the bias tape by sight, pretty much each side pressed toward the center and then folded and pressed flat again. I pin all the bias tape unfolded along the raw edges of my stays. I also fold the raw edge of the bias tape in on the end. I hand sew along the fold. using a running back stitch and doubled white thread. I fold the tape around the back and pin in place. I whip stitch that in place. I insert all the steel bones into their respective channels. It's a little difficult to go around the end of the strap, but that's why the tape is on the bias, so there's a little stretch for turning around things like this. For the front, I use a wider bias tape, sewing along the edge same as the rest. I create 2 bound holes at the very center above the busk, at the back side of the bias tape. I whip stitch the bias tape down in the back. I thread my 1/4 inch ribbon through those middle holes with a safety pin. I close off the end, making sure to anchor the ribbon there at the same time. Time to add the grommets! I use my awl at the end of the shoulder strap, set the front grommet piece in, place the back piece, set it in the tool, and use my press to clamp the grommet in place. I got my grommets, steel bones, setting tool, and lacing cord all at corsetsupplies.com. My husband already had the press. I like it much better than trying to hammer them in place. I used the awl to create holes where I marked along the back of the stays. I place grommets and set them one at a time. I need to attach ribbon to each corner on the front to tie the straps on. I cut lengths of the 1/4 inch pink ribbon and melt the ends with a lighter. I double the ribbon, place the folded end on the inside, and pin in place. I hand sew those down using a whip stitch and doubled thread. I thread the ribbon into the grommet of the strap and tie in place. To start spiral lacing, I tie the lacing at the top with a slip knot. Then I start lacing. I go over to the right side and go down, then I come back to the left and come back up through. I continue this pattern so it spirals down the back of the stays. The lacing hangs out from the last hole in the bottom. When you tighten spiral lacing, you pull from the bottom and tie another slip knot at the bottom and tuck the ends under. If you're curious, I have my Getting Ready Regency video here. I will tighten and tie the middle ribbons when I try it on. I sew a stop gap about an inch up from the bottom of my busk channel at the bottom. This helps it stay in place as it's a tiny bit short. I'm trying it on with my Italian Renaissance camicia. It fits really great. The straps will end up being in the way for the ever after dress. I will fold them down in the back and safety pin them out of the way. I love these completed embroidered Regency short stays. I'm very glad I finished them. Thank you for joining me today as I made my hand-embroidered Regency short stays. The second part in my Ever After dress series. I'm excited to be making progress on this project. Next up will be the Gamura or underdress. If you liked this video and want to see more sewing and costume videos, be sure to subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Happy sewing! Hello. Hi. Mom got you to talk. Okay, sweetie. Good girl. Short stays. Short stays. Oh, God.